What's up, everybody? This is Sports by David, and I am going to be talking about 7 wide receivers that you need to add to your fantasy football team after week 1. All these wide receivers have a roster percentage of less than 50%, so they should be available in most of your leagues. Starting off with the most popular name on the waiver wire this week is Puka Nacua, who's only rostered in 2.5% of leagues. He is number one on a lot of people's list for a good reason. He caught 10 passes on 15 targets for 119 yards, scoring 21.9 fantasy points, finishing as wide receiver 9 in week 1. He had a target share of 39%, which is crazy, and he was featured in 78% of the Rams' offensive snaps. So I think he's definitely worth the ad just off of the volume and how he produced and how much he was being targeted by Matt Stafford. So definitely pick him up, but I know he's going to be, like I said, on the top of a lot of people's list. If you can't get him, pick up his teammate Tutu Atwell, who's only rostered in 5% of leagues. He finished as wide receiver 15. He caught 6 passes on 8 targets, and he also recorded 119 yards like Puka. And, he had 17.9 fantasy points. He had a 21% target share, which is still pretty high. And he was featured in 79% of the Rams' offensive snaps. With Cooper Kupp being out, both Puka and Tutu should see a lot of volume and should, that should translate into great production for them. They don't get Cooper Kupp back until week 5, and they have a pretty favorable schedule with the Colts, the Cardinals, and the Eagles coming up. So definitely try to target one of those receivers. Puka is going to be, probably the more popular name to add, but if you can't get him, definitely try to aim for Tutu Atwell. Number 3 on my list is Kendrick Bourne. He saw great volume in his matchup this week. Even though the Patriots lost, Mac Jones was throwing the ball a lot and they were down, but he was featured in 91% of the offensive snaps for the Patriots. He had a 20% target share, and he had 24.4 fantasy points, 6 receptions on 11 targets, 64 yards, and 2 touchdowns. But even if you take away those 2 touchdowns, which is like 12 points, he still had a pretty solid outing. Number 4 on this list is Rashid Shaheed. He's only rostered in 2% of leagues. For the Saints, he was featured in 54% of their offensive snaps. He had 18% target share, 5 receptions on 6 targets for 89 yards and a touchdown. He was kind of serving that as that wide receiver 3 behind Olave and Michael Thomas, but kind of providing that deep threat or just that X factor, player within that Saints offense. I think he's definitely a player you should add, or he's worth adding if you can afford the spot and need a receiver, just because, like I said, a lot of the attention is going to be going towards Olave or going towards Michael Thomas, and he can be that guy that, has favorable matchups week in and week out and can produce and show that he's at the very least, a valuable flex option for your fantasy team. Next on my list is Allen Robinson, who's only rostered in 1% of leagues. He had an 89% offensive snap share for the Steelers. He had a 17% target share, and he scored 11.4 fantasy points, catching 5 receptions on 8 targets for 64 yards. With Deontay Johnson dealing with a hamstring injury now, he might be out of the lineup. It's only going to be George Pickens, and the wide receiver 2 is probably going to be Allen Robinson, as he's already featured in almost all of their offensive snaps. So definitely worth picking him up. Number 6 on this list is Rashee Rice, who's only rostered in 9% of leagues. He was featured in 31% of the offensive snaps for the Chiefs. He had a 12% target share. He scored 11.6 fantasy points, catching 3 receptions on 5 targets for 29 yards and a touchdown. I think with Travis Kelce kind of dealing with the injury and all the struggles of the Kansas City receivers, they're dropping passes and just didn't look good. I'd imagine Rashee Rice getting featured a little bit more in this offense just because of how much the wide receiver core struggled and how he showed he can be a reliable option for Patrick Mahomes. Even if Travis Kelce comes back, I think, Rashee Rice can serve as like a reliable wide receiver and a kind of open wide receiver core for the Chiefs. Last on my list is Robert Woods for the Houston Texans, who's only rostered in 2.7% of leagues. He scored 11.7 fantasy points in week 1. He had 6 receptions on 10 targets for 57 yards. He had a 22% target share and was featured in 75% of the offensive snaps for the Texans. I thought Dalton Schultz in the Texans offense would serve as a, security blanket for CJ Stroud, but it kind of looks like Robert Woods is taking that role. I know Nico Collins, I think he had like 11 targets this week, kind of served as that wide receiver 1, but Robert Woods was kind of that security blanket for rookie CJ Stroud, taken away from Dalton Schultz. And if that's going to be the case for the remainder of the season, and Robert Woods can definitely provide that 10 to 12 to 14 points, on a weekly basis, if he kind of keeps up this role, just from the volume perspective and from Robert Woods' history, he's a really solid wide receiver. But in the comments below, let me know if I'm missing somebody on this list. I think these are, great waiver wire targets to try to swoop up on your roster if you're in need of a wide receiver. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. And until next time.